Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you a man who changed the game in professional wrestling, the co-founder of TNA, four-time WCW World Champion, six-time NWA World Champion, six-time WWE Intercontinental Champion, and WWE Hall of Famer, the King of the Mountain, Double J, Jeff Jarrett. How are you doing, Mr. Jarrett?
Bien. Good, Martin. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine. I wanted to ask you the first thing I wanted to say. We have a lot of young fans who may not know about your time before WWE. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with the wrestling business from a young age and your beginnings in it?
Sure. I'm a third-generation promoter. My grandmother got into the industry in 1946.
Yeah, Christine Jarrett, right?
Excuse me?
Christine Jarrett, right?
Christine Jarrett, yes. Christine Jarrett. Good for you, Martin. Is that a abuela? Is that a grandmother?
Yeah,
abuela. But anyhow, yes, she started in basically selling wrestling tickets, and then she worked her way up to what we'd call a chief financial officer nowadays. And then my father, he got into the business and he promoted shows, and then he wrestled, and then he also promoted as well. It's a family business, and so when I was still in school, I was a part of promoting shows and setting up the ring and tearing down the ring and all that. Then I refereed. I've been in the business since a young age. My first match, 1986, just a young man. And just this month, I celebrated my 35th year in the business. So 35 years actively in the business. So been around a while. Started here in the family business for about 7 years, and wrestled in Puerto Rico and Japan and Texas and different parts, but mainly in the South in the United States. And then went to the WWF in 1993. And then you're probably aware of that point on, I would assume, Martin?
Yeah. You had a pretty good career in WWE, the first company that gave you worldwide recognition. In your opinion, what is the greatest match or moment you had working for WWE? I know it's a lot of time to cover, but can you think of maybe one or two moments that define your time there?
Yeah, it would be, I went to work for the WWF, that's what it was called at the time, in 1993. And, I had a series of matches against Shawn Michaels. He was a favorite opponent. Also, I had some tag matches later, because I've worked for WWF and then WCW and then back to the WWF and then back to WCW over about an 8-9 year period. And so, WWF had, teaming with Owen Hart in a tag team situation. We wrestled DX many times, Road Dogg, the New Age Outlaws. So it's hard to name one, but at WCW, I got to wrestle Bill Goldberg, Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, who's who, you name it, during that era, DDP. So all kinds of, it's really hard to name one, but, during that time, the business attitude era is what it was always commonly referred to. Man, there was a lot going on. Both companies were very successful during that time.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned that, because I wanted to ask you that after your departure from WWE in 1999, you went to WCW, where you finally became a solidified main eventer in a big company, and you became a four-time world champion. How do you remember your time there?
As a part of the My World PR tour over the last 5 days, we've talked about all different forms of and all different times of my career going back over the 35 years. But, during that time at WCW, you just referenced it, became a four-time world heavyweight champion. And that's one story. But in the My World podcast, we're going to tell the story behind the story, because outside the ring, it was very chaotic. The corporate atmosphere was very unrest, lots of different moving parts. It goes without saying, 1999, 2000, and then in 2001, the WWE bought their competition. As a part of buying their competition, the business radically changed. So what went on in the ring and during that time, what went on outside of the ring was completely two different stories.
Yeah, I can imagine that. The next thing I wanted to ask is, did you always want to become a promoter? How did the idea of funding your own promotion, TNA, with your father came about?
I've often thought about that. Had WWE never bought their competition, I'm not sure that I would have followed in my father's footsteps as it relates to being a promoter. It's always been in my blood. Again, my grandmother promoted, my father promoted. So when the WWE acquired their competition, it was very apparent to me that there was a huge void in the marketplace. It's hard to be number one if there is no number two. So that just the opportunity opened itself, and there was an enormous amount of talent that were free agents, and I just felt the time was right.
Pretty cool. You had the experience with both TNA and GFW. Would you say it's very difficult to be a wrestling promoter in America?
I wouldn't say difficult, but it takes a lot of luck. Even Vince McMahon has gone on record saying he's one of the luckiest men in the world. I also think he's got incredible business acumen. But to be a promoter, you do have to have luck. You do have to have perseverance. You got to have patience at times. You got to be well funded at times. But you also just have to as a part of creating the roster, that you have to be able to create talent. Sure, you can hire talent from other rosters at other times that made their name, but you have to have the ability to develop your own talent. And that takes time as well. So it's not the easiest job, but I've always had a burning passion for this industry, whether it was marketing or production or in-ring, whatever it may be. I've always had a burning desire for this industry.
Yeah, and also TNA was very influential in creating guys like AJ Styles, like Samoa Joe, getting them to the next stage. Do you think that you can take some pride about it? Do you think that TNA gets the recognition for that?
Over the years, when you look at it, that you have to ask AJ Styles or Samoa Joe or Christopher Daniels or Ron the Truth Killings was the first African American NWA World Champ. You could just look at multiple talents that came through the system. I always say, they'll say, look what TNA did for those guys. I also say, look what AJ did for TNA. Look what Samoa Joe did for TNA. But during that 2002 to about 2010 era, a lot of fun. Some of the best times of my life over the 35-year career. But a big part of what made that so much fun was the hard work and the ups and the downs and the ins and the outs and the story behind the story that we'll get the opportunity to talk about on My World in the podcast to tell those rewarding stories of all the hard work that went into it.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, a few years ago, you came back to WWE, being inducted into the Hall of Fame. And you also had a couple of matches entering the Royal Rumble and facing Elias on Raw. How do you recall these experiences?
I would have never. There was a stat that came out. I think it was almost 20 years between my Raw appearances when I wrestled Elias and the last time I was on. It was almost 20 years. So it was very rewarding. When I got the call to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, I can assure you this: I was the most surprised person on earth that I got the call. But very grateful, knowing the McMahon family, like my family's known them since the 70s. It was without question a very special time in my career.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, Jeff, you're starting a podcast called My World with Jeff Jarrett, alongside Conrad Thompson, who has done a lot of podcasts with Kurt Angle, with Ric Flair. Can you give us a little preview of what you're going to talk about in the show?
When you mention Conrad, you think about he's got Jim Ross and Eric Bischoff and Kurt Angle and Arn Anderson and Tony Schiavone. Yeah. I'm rounding it out. We now has one for every day of the week. But being a part of it, that just on this PR tour, I've got to talk about. It's the simple stuff of the WWF, WWE times, WCW times, TNA times. But different stories of going to Mexico and becoming mega campeon for AAA twice, going to Australia, going to the United Kingdom. There's, over 35 years, there's even India in 2011, 2012. And there's all kinds of stories. So we're going to tell a little bit, and obviously my home promotion here in Memphis, where we used to do our TV, but in the Tennessee area where my formative years. So we're going to talk a little bit about everything.
Well, thanks for your time, Jeff. I wish you nothing but success in your next projects. And I invite everyone to check out your new podcast. Before you leave, please send a message to our fans and tell them where they can follow you in social networks.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, real simple. We actually launched a website that goes along with the podcast. It's realjeffjarrett.com, realjeffjarrett.com. But all of my socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, they're at Real Jeff Jarrett. So I've made it simple. If you can remember Real Jeff Jarrett, you got it. So Martin, I appreciate you letting me have a few minutes of your time today to talk about my world. It starts next Tuesday, May 4th, and drops every Tuesday thereafter. So we're excited to kick this off.
That's great. It was an honor to speak with you, sir, and take care. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Have a great afternoon.